Well, good evening, everybody. It's a very, very beautiful day here in London. Very warm. Finally, a change, and not to disappoint. I do have my small. That's not quite a pint. It was a pint in the bottle, but running short on pint glasses. So I do have my pint, and yeah, I wanted to do a quick live stream, really, addressing some issues that have come up in recent videos, and the primary one concerns the legacy of the great Andres Segovia. A couple of months ago, I did an interview with Stephen Watson. And Stephen Watson, whom you may know, is a no-nail guitar player. He's a guitarist, musician guitarist, but of course we're so used to classical guitarists playing with fingernails that we put no-nail players into this category of their own, even though it's just as much a part of the tradition as nail playing. And in our conversation, we were talking about some of the great no-nail players, and I think Stephen thinks that some of these players perhaps suffered a little bit because of the fame of Segovia, but also because Segovia tended to put down no-nail playing, and Segovia was the big star, and so what Segovia said sort of was taken as a sort of gospel, really. And Stephen, in his research, is showing that the no-nail tradition continued into the 20th century and now into the 21st century. There were great players, great exponents of that approach. We listened to some recordings as part of that interview, so I do encourage you to go and watch and listen if you haven't already. However, I did feel that in discussing Segovia, I perhaps gave the wrong impression, gave a much more negative impression than I would have wanted to. At one point, we were discussing Segovia's historical importance, and I made a comment that I felt Segovia was sometimes held up for the wrong reasons. He's held up for his historical importance, what he did for the guitar, and Stephen jumped in, had a point to make, and so in a way my point wasn't finished. And actually what I was going to say was that his playing is not appreciated nearly enough. And I wasn't actually denying his historical importance. I was actually going to say that I think in some ways his playing still holds up to such a high standard that there's so much we can learn from it, that the emphasis on his historical contribution to the instrument sometimes overshadows his contribution just as a player, as a musician, as an interpreter. And I think some of the things about Segovia, it's a bit like Bream, really, that he is admired, sometimes not admired for the right reasons. For example, Julian Bream is often held up as a master of tone colour because he moved his hand a lot, across along the string and got different tone colours. Because that's not the primary thing that made Julian Bream's playing so engaging. What made his playing so engaging was his phrasing, was his sense of musical architecture, and his way of communicating that. And the tone colour changes are only really effective because he had such a clear vision in terms of the phrasing and the musical architecture that his colorations then took on a huge significance. They were shining a light on the piece. They were orchestrating the piece, but it's not just a random thing where he uses tone color. And I think not enough emphasis is given to Julian Bream's phrasing. And likewise with Segovia, lots of people hold up his beautiful tone, and I think there's no question that his tone was beautiful. Of course, I'm too young to have heard him in concert, but certainly going by the recordings and going by the eyewitness accounts to lots of people. Obviously, I mean, he only died in 1987, so so lots of people did hear him, and his tone really was remarkably beautiful, and in many ways it's the tone that I try most to emulate, to the extent that I would want to emulate any other player's sound. Obviously, that's limited. You can't emulate another player's sound, but it has to my ear, it has this perfect balance of high and low, of this singing quality. This a great guitarist is, the guitar is a percussion instrument. That's its orchestral classification, like the piano, because the strings are struck. And but I think the great pianists and the great guitarists are those whose sound is make it sound least like a percussion instrument. They make it sing. So Segovia, absolutely his sound. But I think his abilities as an interpreter are sometimes overlooked. Especially when playing miniatures, Segovia had this. I don't know if it was purely intuitive or whether it came from study. From what I heard, he practiced a lot, and he practiced musically a lot. He was trying to find where the climax was, for instance, and how to build up to it. And I think he's so effective in that. And when you listen to him playing, maybe just a short Mendelssohn arrangement or something, he takes you to the center of the piece. He takes you to the emotional sort of the emotional center of the piece. He finds it, he expresses it, he communicates it, and I think that's partly why he was such a magnificent and famous interpreter. He was a great businessman, of course. He knew how to he knew how to. Anyway, a percussion. Yes, how scandalous. Yeah, well, people are very surprised, but I know that you knew that already. So anyway, that's what I would say about Segovia's playing. So I'm a huge admirer. I did want to, however, just address some aspects of his legacy. I don't want to get into all the stuff about whether he was a good person or not. That's not of huge interest to me, I have to say. I mean, everybody's a mixed bag. And all the stuff about when he was teaching, how he treated Barrios. I mean, there are people who know much more than I do about all of that. And so I just really don't want to go there. But I would like to just perhaps look at Segovia's goals as a musician. I mean, in many ways, he was a huge success. If success is judged by how well you meet your own, ambitions, goals, and he set out these 4 famous goals for the guitar, and I think by any anybody would be able to say by any measurement, I'm trying to say, I think he succeeded in his goals. I'm not necessarily sure, however, that his goals were the right ones, and that's what I'd like to get into here. I mean, the first one was elevating the instrument. It was always taking it out of the hands of the rough hands of the flamenco players and things. And I think, of course, that's just kind of absurd. And I think to set up a kind of animosity between these two branches of the Spanish guitar is just silly. I mean, I have a huge respect for flamenco players. I think there's a huge amount that we classical guitarists can learn from. Sometimes you get sniffy comments from flamenco players about guitar, without naming the person that that said it. A very famous player, I think, said that if only we worried less about our tone, we'd have better techniques. And of course, the good tone is technique. It takes good technique to make a good sound. It's just a difference in. We're just trying to achieve different things, and so the techniques are formed and cultivated towards particular ends that are not going to be the same. Flamenco and so-called classical guitar, it's a very different approach to the instrument, very different musical lens, very different sound. So, but I think this kind of snobbishness on his part, I think is I think so. I think that in a sense that first goal was slightly absurd. I'm not sure anybody really ever went along with it and really believed it. However, I think establishing the serious repertoire, I think this is of course one of his great achievements, and this came up in the comments. People were sort of, in a sense, just because of how things, came out in the interview. It was a free flowing conversation. I think people were understandably a bit confused that we were not emphasising his achievements in this area. Of course, the first thing was that the interview was not about Segovia; it was about no-nail players. It's just that his presence is so large in the 20th century history of the guitar that he had to come up, and he came up primarily with regard to the influence of what he said about no-nail playing. But I would just like to say that, for the record, that he definitely did. It was a singular achievement in getting non-guitarist composers to write for the instrument, and it produced so many great pieces. The Villa Lobos Etudes, for example, and so many other works by wonderful composers. I think there are two problems, however, with this part of his legacy. One is what I call the Segovia myth, and it's the myth that is put forth at its most kind of absurd level in one of the Newpen films about Segovia. This impression that the guitar was nothing before Segovia is just false. I mean, we all know the very rich guitar repertoire Tárrega is pre-Segovia, really. I mean, they overlap, but Tárrega was dead by the time Segovia was making a success of himself. And of course we have Rigondi, we have Sor, we have Giuliani, we have the whole Baroque guitar repertoire, which is a complete, it's its own genre, and it being its own genre doesn't make it bad. The fact that it doesn't fit into preconceived ideas of what composition should be doesn't make it bad. It just makes it different. It's probably true to say that we never had an equivalent of a Mozart writing for the guitar. Certainly the guitar's classical era repertoire, there's nothing approaching Mozart in quality. We never had anything which approached the great romantics in quality. But at the same time, those great composers probably wouldn't have been able to write for the guitar. What you have to know about the instrument to write for it well probably meant the guitar was out of their reach. And what often happens with composers, even very fine composers, is that they often miss a few tricks when they're writing for the guitar. They don't treat it as polyphonically as they ought to. They often like the fact that we have 6 strings rather than 4, and so we get some kind of strange 6-note chords. They tend to be quite fixated on the guitar being tuned in fourths. I think Benjamin Britten, there are sections of Nocturnal which are just basically using the open strings for a chord. And I mean, as a guitarist, I see that and think, couldn't you have done something a little bit more inventive? But of course, for those composers, they weren't writing for an instrument with that tuning, unless they were writing for the guitar. So it was something to explore and something to exploit. So it's just different, the way that a guitarist composer comes at it and a non-guitarist composer. Anyway, Yeah, there's some interesting comments that he was of his time, obviously, and yeah, but and he certainly would have had maybe preconceived ideas of what what a serious instrument is. So yeah, that's right. So perhaps you're right. Perhaps for him, he did achieve that. Um, yeah, that's an interesting point. The thing about Your Bet is there's the comment here is that the Segovia myth started in the second half of the 20th century. By that time, the pivotal Segovia Spanish virtuosi like Your Bet and Pujol had retired, or in Your Bet's case, died. So yes, I think that's true. But I think he was kind of quite happy to go along with it. I think this was part of Stephen's objection to Segovia, that Segovia could have vocally uh, you know held up some of those figures. So anyway, this is not a Segovia criticism. I mean, I've tried to lay out exactly what I think Segovia. I mean, is it in a way there's no guitarist I'd rather listen to a lot of the time. I put on Segovia before I put anybody else. And that's still the case, even with the great players that are around now. I think he's just remarkable. Yeah, Your Bet's concerts. Yeah, I mean, I think Your Bet was definitely the precursor. Yeah, he was touring all over the world, and I think he was a great virtuoso. He had a kind of flair. He was in Pujol's biography. Pujol tries to get about the Pujol's biography of Tárrega, I should say. He tries to get across this difference between Tárrega and Your Bet, the difference in temperament. Tárrega was serious. He was introverted. He didn't actually like playing. He liked playing for small gatherings. But I think Your Bet was much more outgoing. There's another comment here. Didn't the Avengers sign the Segovia Accords? I'm not sure what that's about. So if you want to. If you wouldn't mind, if you want me to comment on that, maybe rephrase it. Oh yeah, my favourite guitarist now. Oh well, that's interesting. I should have thought about that before coming on. I mean, there are very few that I don't like, to be honest. I think there are so many great players. Yeah, I wondered if it was maybe something. Yeah, something else. Okay, that's So the Avengers comment is about something else. That's all right. Yeah. So favorite guitars. Well, let me have a think about that and maybe get back to you in the next episode. So people between 20 and 30. Oh gosh, that makes me feel a bit old. I still think of myself as a young person, but there we go. I'm not that young. Anyway, yeah. And another thing about Segovia with the compositions is that I sometimes wonder if his quite conservative musical tastes perhaps meant some missed opportunities. So I don't want to necessarily. I don't want to necessarily, get into the motives, Segovia's motives for that. But I think some missed opportunities. I mean, he famously rejected the 4 short pieces of Frank Martin. I mean, magnificent set of 4 pieces by Frank Martin, but he rejected them. So I mean, that's maybe one small quibble. But of course, his achievement is as I say, singular. There's nothing to compare it with because it is so, in terms of getting composers to write for the instrument, it's so far above anything else. And it was Wien that came along and carried on that legacy. I think there are a couple of things to say about his other goals, about concert halls and conservatoires. Segovia absolutely 100% achieved what he set out to with regard to the guitar in concert halls and the guitar at conservatoires. I think there are a few problems with those goals, however. The first thing is that a classical guitar doesn't sound very good in a very large hall. There's just no question about it, in my mind. Segovia used to play in London. He used to play the Royal Festival Hall, and if you were sitting at the back, this is what people say, they didn't hear very much, and they were paying for their tickets, and it was, not the most pleasant of experiences to sit back there. And I think he very much carried it off with his huge stage presence. But I think it's simply too big, for the guitar. And so I think there's now that's not to say that what Segovia did was bad at all. What he did, as I say, he achieved what he set out to, no question. And what he was setting out to, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to formulate a goal any differently at that time. I just think that in hindsight, I mean, looking back, maybe assessing it, perhaps we should ask ourselves what the best venues are to play in today. I think there's no question that the guitar suits a very, very quiet atmosphere, which you do get in concert halls. I think it suits a slightly smaller, more intimate venue. And I think this is one of the Segovia goals I sort of feel that subsequent generations have been trapped by. We're trapped by the image of Segovia as the guitar equivalent of Arthur Rubinstein, But the thing is that there can't be a guitar equivalent of a pianist. It's just a different thing. It works differently. Its repertoire is different. So yeah, I think perhaps, and in today's age, I mean, these days, if you certainly in Britain, if you mention the guitar to most people, they haven't got a clue what a classical guitar is. So it's fallen away from. I mean, there was a kind of golden age in Britain in the 1960s and 70s, and you can see this just from TV footage that John Williams and Julian Bream had primetime slots. I mean, they would get interviewed by people like Michael Parkinson. Not normally as the headlining celebrity necessarily, but they were there sitting with movie stars. Remarkable thing, but I think the perception of what a classical guitar is has really disappeared from the mainstream, and so it gives us an opportunity to perhaps creatively rethink how we present the guitar. And that same goes for concert programs. And Segovia changed how he presented concert programs throughout his life. In his early years, he did the three-part thing, which was what people did at that time, and then he adapted to changing times, and he presented two halves with a single interval. And so I think we can follow Segovia's example in terms of having high goals, high ideals, and an adaptability. But of course, we live in a very different time. I don't know what that's going to look like, and it probably needs people much more entrepreneurial and creative than me to think it through. The last thing is about the conservatoire. The whole conservatoire system. I think this is where the guitar fits, worst, if you like. I think the conservatoire, in the sense that it's there to conserve a musical tradition, I think the guitar has a place there. Obviously, the guitar has a rich musical tradition, and there's a kind of irony here in that we have, on the one hand, Segovia trying to get the guitar into the conservatoire, the institution for conserving a musical tradition, whilst also peddling or allowing people to peddle this myth that the guitar had no tradition. And so why are you trying to get it into the conservatoire if there's no tradition? And I think this has meant in modern times that a guitar course has been it's done in the image of Segovia. The whole thing is geared towards people becoming soloists, and only a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people who are both very, very good, exceptionally good, and exceptionally lucky. They're in the right place at the right time, as Segovia was, and you need both of those ingredients. And certainly, the guitarists that are big names in the classical music world at the moment, like Sean Shebe, for example. I mean, exceptional musician. Thibaut Garcia is another one. Exceptional musician, exceptional player. But of course, they've also been in the right place at the right time, and that's not to play down how exceptional they are. They wouldn't be there being in the right place at the right time is not going to get you anywhere if you haven't got something exceptional to offer. But my point is that a conservatoire course can't be designed for producing people like that, or only producing people like that. People who are, if you like, walking in the footsteps of Segovia as soloists in the general musical world. Only a tiny, 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 minuscule minority will manage to do that. And so I think the whole conservatoire thing, I'm certainly not in favour of kicking the guitar out of conservatoires, but I think it needs to be rethought. And I think classical guitarists should be trained in a much wider range of musical styles, musical genres than they are at the moment. If they're to come out and make a living as a performing guitarist, performing musician, they're not going to be able to do that playing Ponte sonatas. And the conservatoire, the conservatoires are certainly there to impart the what high interpretation is. Absolutely, guitarists should be formed in that. They should be formed in the pedagogical history of the instrument. They should know all of that. I mean, it is our art. The conservatoire is there to conserve it. Thankfully, we do have a much broader appreciation for the pre-Segovia tradition, and that's all part of the conservatoire, and that's all great. So I'm not saying that anything is wrong there. I'm saying that there needs to be another component. I think guitarists should be leaving conservatoires, classical guitarists should be leaving conservatoires perfectly fluent in reading jazz charts so that they can go into a pit. A lot of the guitarists from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, where I studied, the ones who are successful players and who are say not Sean. I mean, Sean is the huge success, but these are people who play at West End shows. They can sit in a pit and they can do what needs to be done on a guitar. But not to criticise the conservatoire. They do offer a certain amount of that, but a lot of the people who are doing that professionally could do it before they went there, and that meant that the people who couldn't do it before, who hadn't had say a slightly bit of an electric guitar background, they might be coming out ill-equipped for the modern musical world. I mean, and another thing, of course, I'm married to a lutenist, and being able to realise a figured bass, having good harmony skills. I mean, there's no question that there should be. I mean, in many conservatoires now, there's not nearly enough musical theory. There should be far more harmony and counterpoint. There should be far more deep analysis. There should be improvisation, proper classical improvisation, which of course flows from harmony and counterpoint. So there should be all of that. I mean, I think guitarists should come out with good grade 8. And for those outside the UK, grade 8 is kind of like that's the end, would be the minimum entry requirement for someone going to a conservatoire. What we call grade 8 here, with the various exam boards. Grade 8, and it's sort of serious repertoire you're playing at grade 8, and I think guitarists should have piano as a second study at a grade 8 level, and it means that if they're having a tough time, they can play organ at a church and get a bit of money on a Sunday. They can do a bit of piano teaching. A lot of schools like people who can teach more than one instrument. And there's always need for piano teachers. Piano teachers are very, very, very busy. They can have a full-time job at one school often, just teaching piano, one after the other. So I think and having piano skills makes you a far better musician. So I think there's a lot that could be done. I mean, Segovia, of course, used to kind of, I think partly jokingly, put down the piano. It was a kind of roaring lion or something. I can't remember exactly what he said. And he was asked why he had a piano, and he said it was for the photographs, which was a great answer. I mean, full marks for wit. But yeah, I think playing down the piano has been a fatal mistake. And so the conservatoire, what the conservatoire's developed into was not just conserving a musical tradition. It was for training orchestral musicians. Now, for a guitarist, we don't have a very big orchestral role as classical guitarists. There's the odd piece. I've played quite a few of them with orchestras. Things by Boulez, Oliver Nussin. That's the harder end of the spectrum. Then, of course, you get the easy stuff like Mahler 7. Not easy music, but it's an easy guitar part. But it's not. You're not going to make a living doing that. For example, mandolin should be covered. Having just enough mandolin to be able to play the Don Giovanni part and a few other things that come up in a professional music life. And the other thing I would say about this is that often orchestral managers and fixers, when they contact a guitarist, they actually expect you to be able to do that. They just almost think of it as all as the same thing. I once had to play mandolin for it was an Oliver Nussin symphony, and unfortunately I hadn't looked at the music until a couple of days before the rehearsals, and it was a very good. It was a BBC orchestra, and I thought I'd better look at the music. In fact, so then I saw it as guitar stroke mandolin, and of course I just about died. And I asked, who's playing the mandolin, and he immediately called and said, well, I thought you were. And so I had to get hold of a mandolin and very quickly learn where to put my fingers for that part, and it was broadcast on radio as well. I think all of these things, much wider, much broader training, and I think part of it, it's not Segovia's fault at all, but I think the shadow of Segovia, that the idea that we're forming people to be like him at conservatoires, I think that's a problem, and I think that's a part of his legacy that needs to be reassessed. So that's about all I've got to say on it. But there are some interesting points. Oh yeah, favourite player Stephen. Yeah, well Stephen's a really, really fantastic player. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course, because it's so modelled on Segovia. Yeah, there's a kind of obsession about him. I agree with that. But again, we actually miss the best points about Segovia, which actually his playing still stands up. I think his playing is magnificent. I think he hit a sort of peak in the early 1950s. He was about 60 at that time, so not a spring chicken, but he had fantastic longevity, and I think there was this. As with so many musicians, they kind of hit this peak before the technical decline, which just comes naturally with age. The hands can do less, and you can hear a big difference in Segovia when he's in his 70s. Still plays great. He was still playing very well when he was 90, but I think when he was about 60, there was the musical maturity from all those years, and then he still had the technique. Magnificent. Yeah, well, the thing is that with cello and piano, yeah. So one of the comments is saying we don't see the same obsession with one figure in piano and cello departments. I mean, that's because there were so many of them, and Segovia, of course, was held up as being the one, the only one. So, I mean, that's part of the problem there. But as I say, I would just repeat again that it's actually got to the point now where I think Segovia is ignored, and it's a shame that he is, because I mean he's remembered for being nasty in masterclasses, but his actual playing isn't really looked at, and I think guitarists could learn a huge amount, just the way to produce a sound, a singing tone. I think so much of what Segovia does on the instrument is kind of what's missing from a lot of playing now. Training following conductors. Yeah, I mean that's just training playing with other people as well. So guitarists are not trained to play with others. It's partly because it's a very soloistic instrument. There's not much chamber music, but having a slightly broader base as far as genre is concerned would really help with that as well. So anyway, those are some thoughts about the Segovia legacy. I hope I've made the record, set the record straight that I'm a huge admirer of him. I think in terms of what he set out to do, I think he was a resounding success. And I think that certainly his achievement with the repertoire is completely singular. I mean, his achievement with so much of it was singular. But I do think there are certain aspects of that legacy which are taken for granted as goods now, which perhaps in today's world need to be slightly rethought. So I hope that's been interesting. A couple of other things, questions that have come up. There was a really interesting question about Julian Bream, another great figure who is, I think, starting to be forgotten in some ways, which is a great shame because there's so much to be learned from him. And someone asked me in a comment, in fact I see he's here now, that that there's tension between musicality and technique in Julian Bream. Julian Bream very focused on musicality. What would you say about his technique? Well, I think his technique actually, considering that he was largely self-taught, and when you look at how awful his hands often look when he's playing the guitar, I think his technique was remarkable. There are some fantastic live recordings that have come out of Julian Bream from the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 70s. You can listen to them on Spotify. I can't actually remember the label that's released them. It's a kind of small label that releases kind of archive stuff. A lot of it was recorded, BBC broadcasts, and there are some up on YouTube. Someone actually who often comments on my channel put up. If you go to Self-Taught Girl channel, lots of great old archive radio recordings of guitarists there, magnificent stuff, and some of Julian Bream. I mean, they are absolutely remarkable, musically and technically. Almost just, jaw dropping at times. And the thing I would say is that you cannot play musically unless you have technique. The musicality is only in your head unless you have the technique to, make it a reality on the instrument. So that's what I would say about Julian Bream with regard to musicality and technique. He had a reputation for being a tad inconsistent in concert. I think that comes down to two things. I think firstly he was a big risk taker. I don't think it was really a lack of technique. I think he had all the technique to do what he wanted to do, to be honest. But I think he was far more prone to take risks than a lot of modern players. We're obsessed now with clinical perfection. We're worried about tiny mistakes. And Bream was much more about the bigger picture. I mentioned at the start of this about his sense of musical architecture. So I think he was prone to take risks. The other thing is he smashed his arm in 1984, and I think after he smashed his arm and he got it rebuilt and it was set with a bend, so that he could still play. It was a miraculous recovery that he was able to get back to playing in a relatively short time. A matter of a couple of months, I think, but I very much doubt he was the same. I certainly know, speaking to people who heard him just before and just after, that there was a big dip, and I think something like that happening, very dramatic. Smashing up your right arm in a car accident, you're not going to play as consistently as you did before. It's just the way it is, and so I think that was a great shame with Julian Bream. But I think that's the thing about him with regard to technique and musicality. I think he had all the technique he needed, frankly. I think you cannot play as expressively, as musically, with so much variety, with so many risks, without a technique. You just can't do it. Another thing that's been asked recently, this will be the last thing I'm going to talk about, are strings. I've been experimenting recently with Aquila strings. This package is a bit ripped, but it's the Ambra 2000 strings. You can see I've just got the basses left because I took the trebles out of this, and that's why the packet is ripped. So Aquila Ambra 2000, they're Nile gut strings. The trebles are Nile gut. I think they have a great sound. They really suit this new Kevin Aram guitar. The basses are a bit lacking in sustain. I'm not quite sure what the material is, but I think they're meant to sound a little bit like the old basses. And they're really beautiful quality, but they might not suit you. They might not suit every piece, every guitar, every genre. What's this about Bream? How fast the scales were? Fast enough was the answer. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, well, that sums it up. They were as fast as he needed them to be. He was never going to be Paco de Lucia. That's just not what his technique was. But I've never heard a recording of Paco de Lucia where he is able to do what Julian Bream could do. So, and there's a very, very nasty comparison of the end of the cadenza of the Aranjuez on YouTube, where they put a particularly bad performance by Julian Bream which he did as part of his Guitarra. I mean, the magnificent Guitarra documentary. Everything is fantastic until it's Aranjuez, and I think it's his worst record is Aranjuez, and he on that, I don't know if he was having a bad day, but he struggles with the Resguardo chords at the end of the cadenza, and of course, Paco de Lucia absolutely beasts it in his recording, and so somebody put the two up back to back. You can still see it, probably putting Vim de Lucia Aranjuez comparison or something. You can see it. It's quite funny, but slightly nasty as well. And the other strings I've been experimenting with are these sugar strings by Aquila, and I found that I put a whole set on. I think it was the night before a concert. I'd never used them before, and I found that the trebles were a little thin. They're sort of, the sound is somewhere between nylon and carbon, I would say. I think they've got some of the really good qualities, actually, the sustain and volume of carbon strings, but with a bit of nylon warmth, and but I think it probably wasn't enough time to play them in. And so I took off the trebles. That's why the trebles from the Ambra strings have been taken out, because I kept the basses. The basses that come with the sugar strings are these red copper strings, and they're absolutely magnificent. They're rich, they've got sustain, they've got volume. They're very, very sympathetic to left-hand movement, not a lot of squeaking at all. I'm really, really impressed with them, and I think I'm going to be using them again. I'm going to give the trebles another try, and I'll come back to you on that. So, I had a question regarding my... Well, that's interesting about the question about tone colour. I was very, very influenced by Julian Vim in my formative years. I only took up classical guitar when I was 11, relatively late. I'd played electric from the age of 9. I don't really play electric now. And quite early on decided to focus mainly on classical. And Vim was the hero. I think his playing. I mean, I still love his playing, but at that time it just had a quality that it's hard to put into words, really. And of course, tone color is such a big part of his playing. And I think from those early years playing the guitar, I very much conceived the instrument as a miniature orchestra. And as I've got older and discovered the greatness of Segovia's playing, I think he uses tone colour in a slightly different way, and I think perhaps my approach to tone colour has moved slightly more towards the Segovia camp, trying to play lyrically, but also there's a kind of vocal colour in Segovia's approach. It's almost like he is able to play vowels. That when a song is being sung, there is colour in the melody produced by the vowels in the words, and I think Segovia has this way of doing it. And once I discovered that, I discovered the huge range of possibilities that there are in changing the angle of the hand, which Julian Vim didn't do much. I think he admitted actually late in his life that he had never really done that. He very much just moved different parts of the string, but using different angles of attack, and also different release points. So sometimes releasing the string towards the neck, sometimes using the wrist to play the stroke, sometimes even the whole arm, sometimes the elbow. Pavel Scheidl's a great example of this. So I think I've explored that much more in the last decade, and probably only found my voice as a player after I started doing that. And I'd got out of the thing in my teens and early 20s. I was maybe still a bit of a Vim clone. I mean, a lot of players go through a phase of if they love Julian Vim, they kind of want to emulate him because of its greatness. But of course, you've got to find your own voice. One more thing I'd say about this whole thing is that Marcelo Cayath wrote an article about a decade ago for Guitar Salon International, I think, that published it, and it was the guitar miniature orchestra versus the guitar as a miniature piano, and he talks about the development of the instrument away from it'd been conceived as a miniature orchestra, say by Segovia and then by Bream, to an instrument that's much more pianistic with the Barweco, David Russell generation. I think John Williams. I think he actually argues that John Williams is a kind of transition figure, if you like, in that development. And I really feel strongly that the guitar, as much as I love the playing of David Russell and Manuel Barweco and all the players of the pianistic school, I mean the great players of that school, I really feel strongly that the guitar strengths is as a miniature orchestra. It's the thing that it can do that no one else can. And I think if we try and sound like a miniature piano, in the end we'll want to just listen to a real piano. But very few instruments can sound it can sound quite so orchestral as the guitar. So that's how I conceive the guitar. I do tend to think in orchestral terms when I'm working out the tone colours to use in a piece. But again, it has to be combined with phrasing. I think I've retained from the Julian Bream influence is this to try and have a clarity of phrasing always. So oh yeah, Bream played with heart. Well, he certainly did. Opposed to John Williams, he didn't look at the fretboard. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I had never thought about that with Julian Bream not looking at the fretboard. I don't really go in for the Bream versus Williams thing. I think they're both great in their own ways, and I mean, some people make the most absurd comments really about John Williams being merely a technician. I mean, it's a heap of nonsense. He's an incredibly expressive player. I think his expression to me comes across as more intuitive than Julian Bream's. Julian Bream's is a very ordered, organised expression. I mean, he really, really thinks very deeply about how the piece should go, and then his expression is then geared towards that end. John Williams, I think, I'm not saying that he doesn't think deeply about the piece, but he has a very kind of organic expression. It's lovely. I love it as well. And in the Spanish repertoire, Scarlatti, absolutely. I mean, he's a magnificent Scarlatti player. He really gets that. I think almost more, more than most. So yeah, that's what I would say about John Williams. Yeah, well, that's fascinating. Your teacher talking about the vowel sounds. Yeah, well, we're all upset and been more obsessed with speed. We're all obsessed with speed at a certain point, and then it gets to this stage where we haven't got enough time to practice to be obsessed about speed. That's how it is in my case, anyway. So yeah, I think for classical guitarists, speed's not the issue. We need to go fast enough, like Julian Bream said. We need to go fast enough to be able to play the piece in the way it should be played. And we should have a strong conviction that that's how the piece should be played when we're playing it. Not to the extent that we become a kind of musical bigot and think every other approach isn't worthy. But I mean, we should have conviction. We should conclude. We should formulate an idea of how the piece should play before we present it to anybody. Otherwise, I mean, what are we giving people? Something we don't really believe in, don't really have no conviction about. Who wants to pay to hear that? Yeah, so I think I think clarity of intention all very important. Now here's a really interesting comment. I must go because this has gone on too long, longer than I wanted it to. But this is a really interesting comment. We should overcome introversion. I wasn't quite sure what that meant for a start until it said, meaning like in a concert we should aim to please the common ear. Like play only the third movement of the 5 bagatelles. I mean, that's a really interesting comment. I think there's something in what you say. I think I mean Segovia actually played lots of small pieces in his concerts, and he I think he had a sense that the guitar, especially in a big hall, struggles to pull off a big, long, extended work and hold the attention of the audience. So I mean, my approach these days is to try and maybe have one piece like that in a concert. One piece that's more of a challenge, which is and which is there for everybody, but perhaps primarily directed to the connoisseur who has heard the famous pieces lots before, and needs something else. I mean, we're playing for connoisseurs, as well as the way you put it, the common ear. I think we do need to include some of the more famous pieces, because I think for most people they're not famous anymore. As I said before, most people have no idea what the classical guitar is, let alone its repertoire. Even Cavatina from the Deer Hunter, it's a generational thing. If you ask people above a certain age, that's an incredibly famous piece. That's what they associate, at least in Britain, it's what they associate with the classical guitar. But for younger people, they have no idea what that is. They don't even know the movie. So I think the fact that we do have masterpieces like Recuerdos de la Alhambra. A friend of mine said to me once, and he'd been going to guitar concerts all his life, and he said to me, "I've never heard Recuerdos de la Alhambra in a concert. Nobody plays it because everybody plays it. We're too afraid to play this famous piece because we think everybody plays it, and then the net result is that nobody plays it." So I think having some of the famous pieces for, as you put it, the common ear, I think is really important. I think also having music that is geared towards the common ear, but not necessarily famous guitar music, and this is where arranging stuff comes in. I mean, people used to arrange. We have a whole tradition in the guitar of arranging operatic arias for the instrument, and that's because at that time those arias were popular. Now, those are not arias that are necessarily going to chime with the general public now, apart from the very specialised classical music public and people who go to opera. But I mean, to take a famous film piece, I've got a few arrangements going to be coming out quite soon. So yeah, that's right. Nobody plays it because everybody plays it. Yeah. So a few arrangements will be coming out now of some film music, and I think there's far more scope there, and I don't think we need to be worried about being populist. And sometimes classical guitarists, we are certainly afraid of the voices of the kind of more snooty people who will maybe look down on us because we're doing something popular. And I think we've got to totally detach ourselves from those considerations. And when we give a concert, we're giving a concert for everybody. We need to give a concert for the person who has never heard a classical guitar before, maybe never even heard classical music before. We need to reach them. We also need to give the concert for the connoisseur as well, and find a way to reach everybody. And when people come to a classical music concert, the common ear, if you like, has to cut the connoisseur a bit of slack and sit through something they might find a bit challenging. The connoisseur has to cut a bit of slack to people who've never been before, and sit through a few pieces that they've heard many times before. Video game music. Yeah, all of this stuff is good. I mean, video game music's not good for me because I've virtually never played a video game. I have no interest in them, and I wouldn't know them. I mean, they wouldn't be famous pieces to me, but to a lot of people they would. So I think if there's anything that you as a player are interested in, I'm quite interested in certain movies, certainly from a certain generation. I mean, that's movies that are older than me, which has a limited, as every year goes by, a more limited reach, and but certainly new films as well I'm quite interested in. But people will have different interests, and you find the thing you're interested in musically, and be prepared to perhaps present that to people. Lots of scope for that, and we're carrying on and developing a very, very big part of our guitaristic tradition when we're doing that. Giuliani arranged the famous arias of Rossini because that's what the public would recognise. Tárrega arranged the famous piano pieces of Chopin because people would recognise them. I think for Tárrega he was also proving what the instrument could do as well. I think it was a kind of dual purpose. But and the thing is about with music, there's no genres. For me, are irrelevant. What we call the classical guitar is just the nylon string Spanish guitar. It has certain qualities, a big tone color potential, a very lyrical potential. It's a very beautiful instrument. That's what the instrument is. I don't think it means we need to play only what we call classical music. I think there's good music and there's not so good music, and you have to be the judge of what's good and what's bad when you're putting a program together. Yeah, I think an open mind. Rely on your own quality control. I think that's what I would say. So. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for. I was kind of worried because I announced this so late that no one would come, and I thought it would just be my monologue on Segovia. But it's been really interesting. There's some great questions there in the comments. So I think we're going to do this again, and we'll do it in the weeks when I'm not doing a live stream concert. I'm going to do a live stream concert next week. We're going to be carrying on the Tariga theme. We're going to have some Pujol in that concert. We've got more Unwound coming up. Stephen Watson, funnily enough, is coming back to speak about Pujol particularly, so that will be released in a few weeks. And of course, we've got our next luthier interview, which is yet to be announced. So there's lots going on. The idea is to always have something coming out at 8 o'clock on a Friday on the channel. When I'll probably, with the amount of teaching I do in family life, I probably don't want to be doing more than 2 or 3 of the live stream concerts per month because I don't want to be starting to repeat pieces. But anyway, lots of potential, and thanks so much to everybody for your support, for coming. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed it, and so I hope you're having something. Now, I always like to promote good, healthy drinking, and. We want to fight the Puritans, modern Puritans. So, okay, all the best.